vote or not to vote? That is the question. It's an important question. And to address that, I'd just like to remind people about how social change actually happens in this country, in the world, actually. But, you know, and I'll use just a couple examples, and hopefully it'll encourage you to look more closely at things like the 8-hour workday or the weekend or workman's comp, any of these things that we have were all brought about through valiant grassroots struggle. And the first one I'd like to mention is Social Security. People like to tout this as, FDR and the Democrats. It's not exactly true. It's not even close to true. During that time, in the 30s, even in the 20s, what we had were dozens of movements afoot in this country, grassroots movements on the streets, pushing, and they all differed to one degree or another, but the basic idea was that just for being a citizen, you'd get a certain amount of income, regardless of infirmity, unemployment, etc. The idea being that we would share our nation's wealth to make sure that none of us fell through the cracks. A real safety net. FDR and his administration, take some of this to assuage and, placate some of those rabble-rousers and basically to stem off a revolution. I mean, this is a time when we have millions of communists and, unionists and people just fighting like mad for change in the streets, not in the voting booth. It didn't matter who was in the office. FDR's choices were basically either to, implement some of these, piecemeal. That's what we often get through these movements, is we don't get everything we want, but we force those in power to bargain with us, at least to some degree. The New Deal programs are a good example of that. That is, FDR is a reactionary. He's reacting to those grassroots struggles, implementing some of the most progressive and successful programs in our government's history. Social Security certainly is an amazing program. It lifted millions of people out of poverty, but it was nowhere near as radical or as revolutionary as the movements that were afoot during that time wanted. And the other I will briefly mention, OSHA, Affirmative Action, passed by the right-wing racist Richard Nixon. Now, it wasn't that people, got together and voted in this awesome dude named Richard Nixon, who would pass these reforms. It was that, there were grassroots movements afoot in this country, in our streets, in our communities, in our schools, in our workplaces, pushing and fighting for change. Richard Nixon and his administration reacts to this, and we get, affirmative action. We get OSHA, to guarantee safety in the workplace. Obviously, it's not what we'd like. It's not as good as we'd like, but that is how social change happens. And right now, we can do the same thing. We have a movement afoot. It's called Occupy Wall Street. You don't need to go down to the voting booth. You need to get involved with your local Occupy movement and see real democracy in action. Real democracy isn't getting to pick between pre-selected leaders who will then make decisions for you. Real democracy is having a voice, an influence, a say in what is actually not only being decided on, but how it's being decided on, the actual process. And that's what you'll see and find at your local Occupy movement. A process that is horizontally structured and deeply, deeply democratic, where you and I equally have a voice in what gets decided upon, how it gets decided upon, and where we move forward as a movement. That's democracy. And I think I can say confidently that those who have went down and been a part of this growing global movement of, a global uprising, are turned on by the fact that they have a voice finally. It's no longer a choice between the lesser of two evils. It's a choice of whether or not you want to continue to play that charade in voting for the puppets of the 1% or joining with the 99% and having a real voice and where we're going to move forward. So I would all encourage you to vote with your bodies by occupying.